This is topic 1.8 for AP Environmental Science on primary productivity. My name is Mrs. Schertz. Let's get started. Okay, so take a look at our learning goals or learning targets up at the top. I can explain how solar energy is acquired and transferred by living organisms. I can describe how photosynthesis and cellular respiration affect energy flow. Okay, so you have to be able to understand photosynthesis and cellular respiration so that you can use it in this context. So we need to understand that ecologists measure how much productivity is in an ecosystem, which is really how the energy is flowing. So first, our producers, sometimes they're called autotrophs, like our plant, our algae, phytoplankton, sometimes bacteria. Some kinds of bacteria can do photosynthesis, and they take the sun's energy and turn it into something that's usable by ecosystems and plants and animals and fungus and bacteria, etc. Okay, then herbivores eat the plants and convert the energy into ATP, the chemical energy into ATP, and they do this through cellular respiration. Some do it without without oxygen, but most do it with oxygen. Okay, so you have to know these formulas. We talked about them earlier in Unit 1. Make sure you know the reactants, the products, reactants, and products. Pause this video if you're still unsure about those things. You got to know them really, really well. The thing about this little diagram is that, yes, glucose is a product, but it doesn't come out. It actually stays as part of the biomass of a plant or phytoplankton or algae. Okay, so primary productivity is the rate at which of converting solar energy into organic compounds over a period of time. One thing to be really clear of on the AP test is that it is a rate. So we have here a rate. I'm trying to circle it here. Here we go. The rate. Now that can be like per square kilometer, some unit of area for this to happen. Okay, so we also have GPP, which is the total amount of energy produced by not the energy from the sun. Sun produces vastly amount more energy than we could possibly use in ecosystems, but how much is actually turned into energy by your photosynthesizers. Okay, but photosynthesizers also do cellular respiration, and so they're going to use some, and we're going to end up with our net that's available to everything else, all the consumers that want to eat the plants. So our NPP is equal to the gross primary productivity minus the respiration by the producers themselves, because they're going to use some of that energy as well. So we can measure it. You do need to know a couple of ways that we can measure the primary productivity. So what we want is CO2 taken up during photosynthesis is equal to the amount taken up through in our sunlight in our process and minus the amount produced in the dark. So our plant is going to make some energy. It's going to take in CO2. We can measure it with a little probe. We can put the plants under light. Then we are going to turn off the lights, and the plant cannot do photosynthesis. It can only do cellular respiration. One misconception is that they used to call the dark reactions was this part, but actually producers can do cellular respiration in the light and in the dark. But when you turn off the lights, they can only do cellular respiration. They can't do photosynthesis in the dark. Okay, so we can measure, that's one way we can measure it. We can measure it through dissolved oxygen probes and things like that in the water as well. Okay, so we can calculate it. We can do some math, and you will have to do this math on the AP test and your unit exams. So it can be quantified in kcals, that's a measure of energy, meters squared per year, or the kcals of calories, which is big C, which a kcal big C is also, there's synonyms per meter a year. And we can measure the energy plus the biomass and also the total mass of all living matter in an ecosystem. We can measure the amount of biomass at a given time. It's called a standing crop. So not necessarily per year, but in a specific period of time, it's called a standing crop. So these are the units that we often see when we are doing the calculations. Okay, so why is it a low efficiency? Conversion of sunlight into chemical energy is not efficient. So most of our ecosystems range from 25 to 50% of gross primary productivity. So 1% of the sun's energy is actually captured by our producers. The rest of it, 99%, just the producers can't handle that much solar radiation. The sun is super powerful, so much light, so much energy. Okay, 60% of this is lost to cellular respiration, and 40% of that 1% from the sun can support your consumers and go up the food chain. Okay, so primary productivity has a low efficiency. That's still our learning goal. And let's talk about aquatic ecosystems in particular. So certain wavelengths of light can only penetrate to certain depths in the ocean. So if we take a look at here, you know that white light, if you put it through a prism, you're going to get this array of colors. That's something you should have learned in middle school or physics class. And so purple and reds don't penetrate as deep in the water. And so this can influence the color of different organisms. So algae at different depths have evolved differences in energy absorption. Red light is absorbed near the surface. So if you're a specific organism that needs to absorb red light, you're a producer, an algae. Even seaweed is macroalgae. It's a big algae. And if you need red light, you're going to be pretty close to the surface. If you don't need red light and you're adapted to not need red light, then you can be a little bit deeper. And then also, since red light doesn't penetrate, some organisms in the deep sea are colored red to avoid predation, which goes back into 1.1, our topic, which is about predator and prey reactions. Okay, now some ecosystems are much more productive than others. If you are warmer and you have more water, you are more productive. So a tropical rainforest is going to be the highest productivity on land. And then in the ocean is coral reefs. If you are colder, drier, or darker, you're less productive. So here's a couple of big things to know. On land, so super important. Productivity on land increases with more water and higher temperatures. It's got to really have both. For example, we live in shrubland, also known as chaparral, and it's dry. It's warm. We have warm summers, but we have completely dry summers. We don't have rain in the summer, so no water. So our productivity is very low. In the water productivity, you need light for your producers and you need nutrients. So remember our nutrients, we've been talking about it in this unit, are nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, which is a K. So having more of those is going to give you a higher rate of photosynthesis, and so that will give you a higher rate of productivity. So this is really important here to know. So take a look here at a couple of things. There's a couple of really important things to understand from this diagram. First of all, terrestrial means land. And I told you here that tropical rainforest has the highest productivity. So remember, this is grams per meter square per year. So first of all, remember that it's a rate. So the rate down here is per year. Okay, that's the first thing to remember. It's also an area. All right, make my A not look like urea, it's area. So it's the rate, like per year, and the area. So down here we have meters squared per year. So the grams of calories per meter per year. Super important to understand for a couple of reasons. First of all, on an FRQ, if you have to define it, you have to say that it's a rate. You also need to say it's a particular area, not the whole ecosystem. So square kilometer, square meter, etc. Secondly, take a look here at open ocean. So this is really important. Open ocean is the lowest productivity per area, per square meter. However, open ocean it has the most total because it's so vast. 70% of our world is covered in water. 67% of our world is covered in oceans. So the oceans create most of the productivity on the planet because there's so much of it. However, it's the worst per area. So if you take a square meter, it's hardly going to produce any productivity, hardly any photosynthesis because of the lack of nutrients. So the open ocean, first of all, you have to have light and you have to have nutrients, and both are in short supply in the open ocean when you get below the photic zone. But if you're in the photic zone, if you're up high near the surface, you might not have nutrients except in places of upwelling that you'll learn later this year. So the open ocean is really bad. There's hardly a lot of light in the open ocean and a lot of life in the open ocean, and there's not a lot of nutrients. But because there's so much of the ocean, it creates the most overall productivity. And so those are important things to understand. Down here you can see our desert scrub. Our shrublands and our deserts are going to be low. Here's our shrubland, that's where we live. They're going to be low in productivity because of the dry conditions. And then up here, you're going to have your wet and your warm biomes to have more productivity. Down here are swamps and marshes. Oh, look, I was wrong. It's not coral reefs that have the most in the ocean or in marine ecosystems. It's actually swamps and marshes. These are your types of estuaries and wetlands that have the most in the water. All right, that's it for primary productivity.